Love you, Linda. Love you.
The courthouse the other day in the hallway, you're singing "Oh Happy Day."
One word prayer. Justice, where are you?
Without further ado, there he is, Michael Easter. Thank you, sir, for joining. We know that you're at a secret location. You're on vacation, in fact, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me, by the way.
You bet. I think our people are dying to know what the jury did not hear. Obviously, you were hired by the defense. So tell us first, I don't want this to sound like a direct examination of your testimony they didn't hear, but just give us a sense of what you looked at. What did you review? And then we'll talk about your opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe some foundational aspect would be, originally I wasn't asked to look at the investigation from this perspective. Originally, I was asked to look at it from my more kind of natural expertise, which is the historical cell phone records and other records. And that's where Attorney Jackson reached out to me originally. And as part of that, I've testified as an expert in over 200 trials, both federal and state. Clearly, I'm now retired and I do stuff privately. But when I started interacting with Alan on the case, I started asking questions that I would naturally ask about the investigation. How do we look at the phone records? How did the government look at the phone records? How do we incorporate them into the investigation and the defense case in chief? Where does the evidence put this? And as I asked more questions were not answered. And simple questions about, well, whose phone records are we looking at? Where's the victim's phone records? Where are the other suspect phone records? None of these things existed. And as the conversation sort of evolved, Alan's like, Mike, would you mind just looking at the evidence from your investigative perspective? And for that, I spent over 20 years with the FBI as an investigator. I was a law enforcement officer prior to that, and formerly a Marine officer as well. And as he asked, I said, you know what, I'd love to look at the case. Can I get access to the discovery? And so at that point, I looked at the discovery material provided by the Commonwealth, not only with the idea of looking at the phone records clearly, which was the initial aspect, but as a fellow investigator, what would I have done? How would I have looked at this case? And what are some logical steps that I would have taken along the way? And did those logical steps take place? And maybe I'll add to that last aspect was, in that review, my focus wasn't just on what evidence they collected or didn't collect in those steps, but what is the Massachusetts State Police policy? What does it say they should have done? And that policy guide is actually online. And I looked at that and made a comparative assessment of what did the Massachusetts State Police do? Is that the best practice? And is it consistent or inconsistent with their own policy guide? And then I drafted a report and provided that to the court. And I think you mentioned it, and maybe somewhat now, Mr. Jackson's "do it" comment had made it to the interweb. So yeah, that's maybe start there for you. And I don't know if that answers questions or creates more, but
I didn't realize that that's how it evolved. You know, I thought it was from the start. You know, let's look at this investigation. I've looked at your CV, so I did know that it was cell phone and that kind of data intensive, right?
Right.
So Mr. Easter, can you tell this jury what your ultimate opinion is as to how the investigation was carried out in this case?
Yeah, I can. Well, maybe the jury's not listening, hopefully, but at least the people on your channel. So for the Bureau, I also was an instructor. And one of the things I always teach is process. Have a process to dissect the problem. And when I looked at this, I really came up with three kind of words to sort of encapsulate the investigation or the lack thereof. And the first one was, I found that the investigation was incomplete. And incomplete in the logical steps you would take to determine whether Karen Reed was the suspect or other people were the suspect. Not following logical investigative steps to collect evidence, to preserve evidence correctly. We can always look back to the crime scene. But even beyond that, as the case migrated throughout that day and how quickly and even prematurely they identified Karen Reed as the sole suspect. So the first word is incomplete. incomplete investigations in turn birth out this next word, which I think of as an easy way to look at it would be inconsistencies. And maybe I'll stick with eyes. Is that an incomplete investigation creates inconsistencies, and those inconsistencies can show up in time typically, and you saw it in this case. This case was riddled with timeline issues. And that's because they never completed proper investigative steps to collect CCTV along likely routes of travel to and from, which they should have done. They should have traced those things. You saw in the testimony of, I think Walter tried to show some Google Maps, which is a great technique. I use it, which is use routes that the phone or the person could have taken, and then tracing those routes for CCTV, whether those are ring cameras, business cameras, or static cameras, to see if we can develop a timeline and a route of travel for Karen Reed's vehicle or someone else that could have been there. And then an inconsistency, it breeds the follow-on, and which is another I word. Maybe I should have coined all these, but is inaccuracies. Incomplete, inconsistent, all ends up with inaccuracies, and you see it now. We have all these inaccuracies in the case that makes you start scratching your head. Why don't any of these things add up? Why do we have so many things that conflict with each other? And the reason that happens is it happens because the investigator had all three of those eyes. Their process was flawed from the beginning. And I get the question from people that know I was assisting, which is, Mike, what do you think? Are they biased? Is it corruption? And that's a really hard question to answer. And the reason I say that is I've worked cases all over the country. I've worked cases in Central and South America and parts of Europe. And I've seen corruption. And I've seen cases that are also worked by people that are just poorly trained and have no experience. And the problem is corruption, inexperience, and no training, they end up looking very similar in the result. And the problem with that then is, how do you determine corruption versus incompetence or lack of experience? And that really then becomes a hard decision for the trier of facts. I think ultimately, my opinion is that I don't have one, whether it was corruption or incompetence or experience. I think the results speak for themselves that the investigators lack the training and experience necessary to have a complete, thorough, and accurate investigation.
Linda, I thought
I'm just blown. I'm writing this down. I'm just blown away with what kind of testimony Mike Easter would have given, and just the presentation, and just this little thumbnail sketch we have of having it incomplete, inconsistent, and inaccurate, leading to it could be incompetence, it could be bias, it could be anything, but it's the same result. I'm just blown away by the whole thematic approach. And so, Mike, what would you say? I'm sure you had. I always have like a rule of threes. Was the three worst things that you saw that were not done? If I'm phrasing that correctly.
So that's a really good question. I think the worst thing that was done from the beginning was the response. And that's what struck me the most. Everyone focuses on the investigation and the outcome of the investigation. As a former law enforcement officer, I've responded to dozens of OIS, or officer involved shootings. And I can tell you that the response is overwhelming. We don't have to beg people to come in and help find the suspect. In fact, we spend more time telling people to not come in, go home, get some sleep, come back later. When I looked at this case, my first law enforcement reaction was, why didn't anybody show up? Why didn't everybody show up? I would have walked in the snow to go help in this case. I've had agents that have been shot. I've had fellow law enforcement officers that I worked a lot with LAPD. A young LAPD officer I recall getting killed trying to stop just a graffiti incident late at night, brand new rookie cop, and made the decision to try to make a difference and paid his life for it. And the response was overwhelming, right? When you look at this, do you feel you get a response or an idea that the response from law enforcement was overwhelming? No, I didn't. In fact, at times I thought, why? What's going on over there in Massachusetts that we don't see this response? I always thought Boston, the old saying, "Blue was blue," and I didn't see it in this case. Didn't, at least not in the way I would hope to have seen it, which is everybody showing up and not having to be sent home or having to be sent home. Did you want to respond to that? I'll give you a second one, or you can respond.
No. Please give us a second one. This is fascinating. It's wonderful listening to you.
Okay. Well, hopefully I won't overtalk you. The second thing I think after that was what we see in the investigation. So then we have to take a step back. And the thing that I thought was most interesting was the lack of training. And that is a cultural problem. Their style of policing, the way they respond to this, reminds me of what I used to see about 20 years ago when I first came in. This sort of shoot from the hip, gunslinger kind of, our word is our bond. We just do what we do. This is how we do it. And it bore out in the response. I mean, we see a leaf blower, we see solo cups, we see a shopping bag. We see no chain of evidence. We see, and I mean, think of the chain of evidence that wasn't collected at the crime. So we see no preservation of the crime scene. And instead, we see an abandonment of it. It was never secured. No proper collection of evidence. There was never even a sketch or diagram done that anybody could go back and piece back the crime scene itself. Instead, we have to rely on some really blurry dash cam video to try to piece together where Mr. O'Keefe finally laid to rest, right? That's horrible. I mean, no one, the first thing you learn at responding to a crime scene is secure this crime scene, identify witnesses and suspects, separate them, do a safety sweep. I mean, you have a dead person on the lawn. What's the possibility the suspect's still present or other victims are present, not just on the lawn, but in the property itself? So that second part is cultural. It's a training issue. And I think you'll see Massachusetts State Police and Canton Police PD have a huge cultural shift from this. And maybe that'll be the biggest thing that the city of Canton or that area will see is a culture in the policing process. At least I would hope. And then my third one is the investigative process itself. It lacked a process. And that was the most surprising thing to me that, listen, I will give them this, is that having worked these types of critical incidences, the pressure, not just from the victim family, from your peers as you work this, but management, even elected officials. I've worked some of the biggest cases in the country, and the pressure that you get to solve that thing before people break for the day. They want hourly briefings. The investigators are under enormous pressure to solve that problem very quickly. And that's where the investigative process has to remain consistent. You can't start taking shortcuts. You can't leapfrog investigative steps and get to an ultimate conclusion too prematurely. Or oftentimes what happens is you miss evidence you should have collected. You eliminate people that could have been suspect or should have been suspects. And you sort of fall in love with the suspect too soon and get vapor lock, or which, a lot of people say confirmation bias, that's the person. We're going to prove they did it. And I want it done by 2 p.m. Or some heads are going to roll. That's those would be my three things on it. I hopefully maybe didn't spend too much time on them for you.
No,
it's amazing. Let me ask this as a follow-up, because I think if you were to testify, it would have come up. People are pointing out the fact that maybe it wasn't so shocking that the response to a officer down in the circumstance where you have other officers involved, as in, I don't know, the homeowner, and some of the others involved in the investigation. Did that play into your analysis at all? That there may have been not just let's take care of the officer down, but let's protect the other officers who might be involved?
I think it's a reasonable question. I don't think that is a reasonable reason, though. And I don't think it was ultimately the reason. I think, let's just say your argument's true. I still would have expected a large response, not to hide, but to a large response and to huddle. And hey, what are we going to do with this situation? And some very in these big incidences, there should always be a big command incident. There should have been a command incident commander, somebody in charge of the command, a response. There would be big type of group meetings, And then there's the small group meeting, the very intimate people that are going to really solve this problem meet separately. And we would have seen those things if this was responded to correctly, even if, as you discussed, Michael, there is some, I don't say corruption, but a tendency to protect somebody. There would have still been a response, or we would have seen an enormous phone tree happening. Although we don't know that type of evidence was collected clearly, but I think ultimately that's where the other investigation that was happening was probably looking into.
And so I have a question. I just want to tell our viewers that we're going to hold your super chats. We're going to continue with Miss Easter without doing the super chats right now for the moment. The issue of the medical examiner, as you know, my husband is a forensic pathologist. The issue of the whole medical examiner and dissing her with regard to the injuries. What would be the proper response when you have a medical examiner who says, "Look, I've in the first 9 days, I've looked at everything you have. I don't find this a homicide. I don't find any injuries consistent with an automobile strike here." Where does that lead you? Does that lead you to say, she's a whack job? Or I mean, I know the answer to that because that's what was in the text. But where do you go if you want to continue investigating because you don't want to have either what you think may be her vapor lock or your vapor lock?
Yeah, I found you're talking about Scortibello.
Yes, Scortibello.
Yeah, I found her to be one of the most credible witnesses there. Her demeanor, her poise, her confidence, and the science. You hear the science is the science, right? It is what it is. I tend to look at things in my world of the data is the data. It tells the story. It doesn't have an opinion one side or the other. Sometimes it benefits you, sometimes it doesn't. In this instance, to really answer your question a little more fairly, is that that's the investigator's job, is to collect the evidence that proves the medical examiner wrong or allows them to make a more informed decision, right? That's where see, when I look back at this, the investigation was over by what, 11 p.m. It never really got legs. And because of that, you even saw in the trials, both of them, that they're still trying to figure out mid-trial in both cases, what happened? Can we still collect some more or conduct more testing to try to bear out what really happened? And I guarantee if there's a third trial, there's more evidence that they're going to try to find. There'll be more testing. So this, in some respects, the case isn't done being investigated, and it shouldn't be. In my opinion, there's still some valuable evidence that's available that should be collected if they knew where to look.
Like what specifically?
I'm sort of reluctant to share, only because my job's not to help the prosecution collect new evidence.
Fair. That's fair. What does the issue of the whole FBI? The judge wouldn't allow them to hear that this Department of Justice FBI involved in this investigation. Now, was there things that you saw that you were able to riff on in your report, even though you couldn't mention FBI, as to things that should have been done? I'm not sure if I'm phrasing that right.
Yeah, I understand your question. Maybe just understand what I did for them ultimately was that in review, I talked about those three things as I looked at the investigation itself and the discovery items, and took each item, looked at it for what it provided, its incompleteness, its inconsistencies, and its inaccuracies. And then I wrote a report that identified what they did, what I thought the best practice would have been. And then I showed what does that look like in comparison to their own policy guide. And I wrote an opinion that on those key elements. And I looked at crime scene response, crime scene management, documentation, investigative techniques or lack of investigative techniques that were used, the premature assignment of individuals at 34 Fairview as witnesses only and not as suspects, no chronological case file, no overarching, well-maintained case management from beginning to end. And ultimately, I think one of the critical flaws was no timeline. And you saw that now in those trials, is that they couldn't put the time together, and they're doing it after the fact with these witnesses on the stand to try to make sense of time. Time is, when I teach process for the Bureau, especially like a kidnapping or abduction, homicide cases where I've worked if you've seen them, clearly we all seen mass shootings. I was at the Vegas. I worked Paddock's phone for that case. The number one thing is time. We need to establish a time from beginning to end and see where the evidence fits in the timeline. And when it doesn't fit, we need to understand, well, why. And that leads to follow-on investigation. Why doesn't this event fit in our timeline? Is our timeline off, or is this event that somebody recollected off? And we need to reconcile those things before we get to trial.
You mentioned a couple of things that are super important. One is a drum I've been beating all along, which is at the end of a trial, if you don't know what the hell happened, how do you get beyond that to find any sort of guilt?
Right.
But you mentioned, and I'll be honest about this, I've been known to poo-poo the cell phone data and how accurate it is and how reliable it is. And I think sometimes it's hard for a jury to embrace it as well. So how do you get them to believe? And you talk about, timelines not syncing up. They've heard everything in this case about what the data tells them or doesn't tell them. How do you get a jury to follow that science and understand and believe it?
Right. You bring up a good point. And I think it's important to make a distinction. When I say cell phone records, for me personally, I'm talking about the cell phone provider. And that would be Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, Sprint when they existed. I think in this case, the people kept referring to them as cell phone records, as the Cellebrite or forensic extraction of the mobile devices themselves. I don't term those cell phone records. Those are a forensic extraction. Cell phone records I look at more separately from the provider. And the times that come from those phone records are easy to sync up because we know what controls time in the cellular network. It's the switch for Verizon, for example. And so chronologically, we see those time events established, and we can replicate those by reattaching to the network very easily. I completely agree with you, Michael, on the Cellebrite stuff. I couldn't agree more. In fact, I find, and I don't want to poo-poo Cellebrite because I think the tool is amazing, but it's amazing for a couple things. It's amazing for content, your call list, and like I would say searches of the internet. It's horrible, absolutely horrible at time. And it's horrible at time because every time I've worked a case, it's always the outlier. They're like, what happened at this time? I'm like, according to what? They're like, the forensic extraction. I'm like, okay, forget time. Forget time when we look at Cellebrite. Let's just look at it for content. I think there's a lot of value, and we could probably have that discussion separately. But time from Cellebrite or any other forensic extraction tool, I do not put a lot of weight on it. Instead, I look at it and where did you get it from? What sourced the time? Is it, when we look at the forensic extraction, time can be controlled by a couple things. One, the network time, NTOP, the network time protocol, or GPS. So what's controlling it? And how was the time recorded? Was it the event start, duration, end? Was it something they looked back at? I absolutely, you're probably getting me too excited about it. I absolutely, every time I work a case and they're like, well, we got the time from the forensic extraction, I just like, please God, help us, because it's never right. And anytime, whenever it's, you think to this case, I think you would even find yourself, there's one of my eyes, there's too many inconsistencies in time as it relates to Cellebrite. So then inconsistencies bear out one of the Daubert standards, I think, or Fry, whatever you guys use on the East Coast, of reliability. If something's inconsistent, is it reliable? Right? And I would argue it's not.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mike, I think I totally agree with you. I think if you could look past time, the forensic extractions are great for content, photos especially. I've worked so many cases where kidnappers have photographed their victims or photographed evidence that they stole, that kind of stuff. So even text content, the names of people that are on their phone tree, because sometimes that's it'll say killer 2, and it's like, perfect, that's exactly what we wanted it to say, that kind of stuff.
How about the apps? I know when we were doing Aaron Hernandez, there was an issue about whether the app's time was correct versus, because all the apps seem to have different times versus the time that was done from the extractions. How does that play in, and was that done here?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think one of my fellow my peers, the guy I used to work with, testified in that case. So I hopefully I don't say something that's different than what he said.
Well, I had the two not we had the two not guilties on the double murder. So we didn't have the first case. We didn't have the first case with where he was convicted. We had the not guilty case, which was after the first case was convicted.
Okay. All right. I don't want to contradict prior testimony from a colleague. I think what I would say then is, what was the app collecting? Oftentimes the user gives permission for the app to collect location information. And then what is the derivative of the evidence collected from the app? Did they use it for source location information? Then you should accept that the app time is GPS time, right? So it really would depend on what you're collecting from the app. If it's photos, you got to be really careful, because is the metadata from the photo is what's controlling time, or is it when the photo was sent, when it was taken? So I would think we would probably have a larger discussion on what the app's doing for you. But I tend to find apps are going to mirror device time. But we could talk about instances where that may not be true if the phone is no longer connected to a cellular network, no longer connected to Wi-Fi. I mean, there's some nuances. I wouldn't say there's always the one answer is the right answer. Would. Maybe I'm hedging my bets here, but just saying.
No, and then gets on. People have the app open. There's no Wi-Fi. They can't. The app doesn't record, and then they come to a place that the Wi-Fi or something is, and it does record, and then that gets all confused. That's
I agree with you.
Right? Yeah. That's the concept. No, that's really interesting. So when
Linda, I'm sorry, let me interrupt, Linda, give a little update on where we are and reset here. Michael Easter is with us. He's the witness that did not get to testify on behalf of the defense as to police procedures in this case. We are now in Justice Watch just past 3 hours, and we have not confirmed this, but we understand that the defense request to fix the verdict slip has been denied. Shocking. We're trying to confirm that. Wouldn't surprise me, but that's what we're hearing. Anyway, I'm sorry, Linda, go ahead.
No, I just had, when you gave your final conclusions and opinions, how many opinions did you give at the very end with regard to what we call the Baden defense? Because that's how Alan Jackson wanted to use you, that you can't trust the messenger here because, how they got to giving the message was really, it's a legal term, screwed up. And therefore it's an improper and incomplete investigation, and you need the specifics from you to say that. So what were your final specific 3 opinions, if you're allowed to get them, if you think you're allowed to get them?
Yeah, I sort of want to be careful, and I think you realize why. I think generally speaking, my report laid out opinions based on those 3 things that I already discussed, which is, what did they do? What was the best practice? And is it what they did inconsistent with the best practice and inconsistent with their own policy guide? And then I offered a conclusion of what I think ultimately those 3 I's, the incompleteness, inconsistency, and inaccuracies, how that led to their final conclusion, and whether you want to call it improper or not. Ultimately, those steps, I believe, created a final outcome that makes it hard to trust that the process was accurate, consistent, and yielded the correct suspect.
Oh, I'm blown away by this, and I'm blown away by the fact that jury could not hear this, Michael Bryant. I mean, to me,
it's wrong. It's just wrong, but it's not the first thing we've said that about in this trial. That's for sure. Let me ask you, Michael, are you going to be following this? I know you're on vacation, but do you have some curiosity about what's happening?
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting. When I retired, my focus was on.
You retired at what, 35? What do you mean you retired?
I'm actually in my 50s, but yes, I retired with the focus of starting my own company to provide, sell side and other location investigative assistance and trial and expert. What I found, and I never really thought about this sort of concept of providing investigative review, for lack of a better term, but it surprisingly has become up more and more since I've retired, is, because I've worked so much, hundreds and thousands of cases, is that just look at it, Mike, tell us what you think. And it's not something I expected to do, but I sort of enjoy. And what's interesting is I've worked one recently where I looked at it, I was like, wow, great job. They did a really good investigation. And my response to the attorney was, have they offered you a deal? Because you might want to consider one. This is an incredible case. They did an amazing job. You know, it goes back to Mike, and it is if you do a really good case and you have great process, you have a great case management, the way you collected evidence, and it's easy and easy to navigate and absorb what happened, a great timeline. When you look at it as a on the other side now as a defense, it's like, ooh, these people are prepared. I don't know if I want to go to trial with these people. Maybe I should consider a plea. Hey, client, this doesn't look good for you. Where this case, you don't see any of that. And I think that's sort of, yeah, it's tragic, I think, ultimately. And I think the tragedy is that, you know, this should have been done not only to the process or proper, but it should have been over the top done for John O'Keefe. That's how we would have done it. You would have been, these guys went over investigated the case, not under investigated it.
Yeah. And I think as we sit there and watch this trial, we think about the O'Keefe family and we think about how they're all in on this prosecution. And yet, was it really an investigation they should be proud of, consistent and confident in, that the real criminal has been found, if there is one? And I think the answer is no. And I feel for them, because they're not going to get the justice that they really deserve.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you watch the I think, you know, I was prohibited from watching this trial, but I tried to catch up a little bit the other day after I realized I wasn't getting called. But when you look at the last trial, watching that family sit there, I've been on this side of the government for a long time, clearly, and interacted with many victim families. And I remember working a young girl that was working at a liquor store, and she was shot point blank in the face. And that case was so devastating. The letter the mom wrote me after we found the three suspects, I keep it, and sometimes I still read it. It's just so. As a father of three kids myself and my own two daughters, it was, I mean, it broke me to read her letter and to see the grief. And that grief exists for them. You know, you probably would expect after this to be a wrongful death suit against Karen, but there should be a wrongful investigation suit against Canton PD and Massachusetts State. They should sue them because ultimately it's their job to collect the evidence, identify suspects, and eliminate suspects and come to the ultimate conclusion of who did it in a fair process.
Yeah. I have two comments. One really is a comment. The comment you made before about how you advise lawyers and all on it. I always tell people that a lot of times you hire experts to give them advice, because sometimes your expert will say, hey, you know, get the plea deal here, and you can go armed with that opinion by somebody like you. It's not that when people ask, well, how many cases have you been hired on? You want to be in a high profile case? No, you're giving that knowledge to the lawyer to give it to the client so they can make an informed judgment. So that really is extremely important. And the second thing is, you started your own company. Is there a link that we can post for your own company as to what it is, where it is, and where they can find your CV, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I'd be happy to provide some if you guys wanted to post it later. I'm not sure how I would do it right at this moment, but
he's on vacation. Come on, Linda.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah, we would like to do that. And the funny thing is, we have everybody in this. I don't know if you've found this, has named people. Like they've named Dr. Wolf Crash Daddy. We had Chris Plord, Steve Plord, who was in California, who's a major accident reconstruction artist, who's been going on and talking to us honestly about what the police didn't do and didn't do. He was spent 45 years with the California Highway Patrol, and his opinion too, this was an absolutely abomination of an investigation. And he's been named Crash Lord Plord. So I'm not sure how our viewers are going to name you. I don't know if they're going to call you a police daddy or what.
I've seen a few suggestions here. We'll have to see how that comes down.
So Daddy Easter. There you are, Daddy Easter.
You know, Linda, you bring up a good one. Is CHP? I've worked several vehicle homicides, people trying to get across the freeway or hit by a vehicle. CHP, that was sort of what I compared this crash investigation to, because ultimately it has to be a crash investigation, which no one ever really conducted until years later, it seems like. Minus Trooper Paul, his attempt at that. We could probably spend a whole show on Trooper Paul, but the CHP is incredible at this. I mean, they do an amazing job. I've never, the amount of effort that they go into crash reconstruction is incredible. CSP is an incredible organization for that.
Yeah, and we could tell that, and he was pretty honest. He even talked about something about the we didn't even know about the diffusers and the light, that they're so far deep in there that to get in there you really have to get in and actually break them. You know, a small hit, you know, a side hit, it's not going to break those diffusers. Something I didn't even know about that I was learning from him as he's talking, and that you know, that was a big deal. The scene wasn't locked down, that there weren't patrol cars, that you didn't even wait till you could wait till the snow melt. You just secure the scene, wait till the snow melt, you'll see where everything is, whether it's a day, 2, 3, whatever. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And you sort of hear excuses of, oh, the weather. Well, at that moment, the weather wasn't that bad that Karen Reed couldn't drive around in her Lexus, by their accounts, under the influence. You know, you got Kerry Roberts driving around. And you look at some of these videos, the roads were pretty empty, but you know what was driving around was snowplows. And having worked some very remote locations, you know what you end up doing is people that are getting around, hey, give me a ride, I need to get somewhere. Like when they say they couldn't go back to the police station, there was a mile and a half to get proper evidence collection bags. Why don't you ask one of the snowplows, hey, go back to the PD, one of the people at the police department is going to give you some evidence collection equipment, you're going to bring it back here, right? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, or one of the other folks that should have been there to help, and I mean, it's just laughable,
right?
And you'll be happy to know now that they've had the audit. You know, they did an audit of the whole process. Now they've put little baby CSI kits in the squads, right? So at least they have that.
You know, it's interesting. When I saw that, I was just shocked. I was like, you know, I worked a gang task force, a gang and drug task force for about 8 years, and you know what I had in the trunk of my car? An evidence collection kit, because at any moment you're probably going to collect some drug or weapons from people, and you have to collect it properly. If you don't start at the beginning being prepared, you've become unprepared, right? So absolutely. You know, it's interesting you brought up the vehicle again, and I wish I could share something that I saw in the evidence that if they would have collected, I think would have answered a lot of questions.
Well, don't tell us now. If there's a not guilty verdict, save it. If it's a not guilty verdict,
I mean, ultimately they missed things that you know, it's interesting. They sent preservations for things but never followed up. And that's indicative of what we talked about earlier, is that by the 2 o'clock briefing that they probably had, they'd already decided who did it and never went back to collect things that they had sent preservation letters for.
Yeah. I just noticed Jason Hodges had a note. They need body cams too. Well, they did add those. They have body cams as well. Before I let you go, I have a question about your name, and it relates to a dumb story about my son. Okay. Easter is an interesting name, obviously. So I want to get the derivation of that. My kid, who was living in the East, goes to San Diego State, and he gets the nickname Easter. And I thought, oh, it's because he lives in the East, right? No, it's because he's wearing a shirt one day that everybody thought you'd wear to Easter. It was like a short sleeve, little dress shirt you'd wear for pictures with the family. So where does Easter come from? What's the derivation of that name?
That's a great question. My dad's family's German, but people keep telling me I look Italian, so I don't know. I'm
Italian.
If you want to make the story even funnier, is my dad's was a reverend or a pastor. So the name Easter, obviously the
you go to see a Reverend Easter for Easter.
Yeah. Yes. And what my youngest sister was actually born on Easter Sunday, believe it or not, one year. So you can't make these things up.
No.
But yeah, growing up, I wasn't called Easter. I was called Christmas. I don't know why. Anything, just some other holiday.
That's funny. It could have been worse. Could have been Halloween or something. Could have been, Flag Day.
I even get today people, but what's funny is my name's spelled just like, Easter. I usually say Easter like the holiday, and people always look at me cross-eyed. And I'm like, really? Or how about Easter Bunny? They're like, and it's like, you could do, what are we talking? Most of the time it's not Easter, it's Esther. And I don't get it, but whatever.
Well, we put our thumbnail on to advertise, but we didn't want to tell people you were coming on because we didn't want any chance that you couldn't come on, that somebody would say, there's some kind of gag order, because there's not. But we held it, but we put on and if you were smart, I think somebody figured out Easter Monday verdict question mark. And we just said,
I thought it was sort of a ploy on the Easter Sunday concept, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, clearly I have limitations of what I would discuss just professionally because that's their evidence, their request. I think in general, we can have a general discussion about it. I was not a witness in the case. I'm not aware of any gag order that was presented to me.
Right. You're not a witness.
But clearly I don't have opinions that I would offer that I think would violate that trust. And ultimately I can't have opinions about the FBI investigation because of non-disclosure agreements. So our discussion is general topics.
Yeah. And I've been bugging Mike for a while. So we are so happy that you took the opportunity, especially when you sent me that first note, said I'm on vacation. I immediately was thinking, okay, a week or two, we'll get back to him. And you were complaining you didn't have a suit. I think I don't see anybody complaining about your attire. Not one person. So,
well, yeah, I didn't bring a suit and didn't bring a collared shirt on vacation. So
good for you. Good for you. That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. We understand. So anyhow, so we hope to try to get you back if there's a jury verdict, get your opinion, especially if it's not guilty.
But I would love to discuss it again if you have other matters that you're interested in discussing.
That'd be great.
I mean, this is an area that you would think I would walk away from the law and that stuff. But, for the last decade of my career with the FBI, I taught witness testimony. I taught agents and investigators across the country how to be good witnesses. And so the interaction with lawyers and the courts is super interesting to me. I wish in some ways my wife, because she should have gone to law school. And I love the discussion. People think of it as an argument, but I think of it more of so I grew up as an athlete and being a competitor, and court to me is a competition of wits. It's like a battle of the minds, and how do we interact with each other? And so what's interesting is you see, like, even in this case, people would be like, oh, they prepared you to testify. And the reality is it was sort of looked at as like this icky sort of moment. But the reality is that both sides do it. Both sides prepare their witness. And oftentimes I even tell when I teach witnesses, it's not just as much a preparation for you as a witness. It's a preparation for the attorney of how they should be asking you questions. What's your style for your going to response, so that they're asking you questions that one, the answer to, and one that you're capable of opining upon. And so I think ultimately, when people ask me that question about didn't they prepare, yes, attorneys have years or decades of learning how to ask questions. We should teach witnesses how to answer them, right? And because it's not intuitive. The interaction's not intuitive, and oftentimes you'll see in newer witnesses is that the defense themes that they have the most trouble with are ones that make them feel defensive, and they instantly get very defensive. And there's no reason to be defensive. Did you prepare to be? Did the prosecution prepare you prior to trial? Yes, absolutely. That's it. There's nothing to be defensive about. Of course. When I get asked that question, yes, absolutely. Every time. I like to do that. It's a very important aspect of being an expert witness, helping prepare and provide I had one guy, you provided a direct script to the prosecution. Absolutely. I do it every time.
Interesting. Have you had a ham sandwich lately?
Yeah, right. Don't get the bureau in. What is it? One of the bureau signs is a ham sandwich. More roast beef, right? I think was the old bureau standard. But yeah, guys, it's been really great being on. And if there's something else that whether it's this matter or another,
that's great.
Invite me on. I'd love to.
Absolutely.
I got plenty of opinions.
I'd love to have you on with Crash Daddy Plord, actually, because the two of you really get along about your experience being from the law enforcement side and seeing things and calling them as they are. And you can't have a better witness than that. You're not witness Dever, never say Dever. And poor Yuri, and I don't know if you caught up, poor Yuri mechanic who speaks 5 languages, asked for a dictionary on what was the word?
I saw that. What was it? What I can't remember the word. I want to say I can't remember the word either.
Was it theory or was it? I can't even remember. It seems so long ago.
It might have been an I word too. I had to watch everything super, super fast because I was not a gag order, but there was a
sequestration, right?
Sequestration,
just in case they pulled you back in.
Yeah. I mean that's sort of more my wheelhouse as well as the examination or the review of witness testimony. And what I thought was the most dramatic in terms of law enforcement testimony was how poor the law enforcement for the Commonwealth testified, which is. They need to be the standard. And in fact, this wasn't them. The standard was some of these just civilian witnesses with limited to no testimony experience. And instead, Yuri should be the gold standard for testimony if he really has the experience that he says he has. But instead, I found him to lack a lot of credibility. He seemed to have a perfect recollection when it benefited the Commonwealth, and a flawed recollection when it benefited the defense. Yeah. And you just saw him constantly filibustering away, which is never good when you're a fact witness. Shouldn't be filibustering. It's the facts and only the facts. He could have come off as, if he was to be presented as the Commonwealth's gold standard. He knows everything. He was part of everything. He's our go-to. He should have been prepped slightly better to be a sort of a cooperative with defense. Yes, that's right. No, that's not correct. He should have been the yes and no man. And instead he was the let me explain this. Let me get ahead of this. Let me explain in my own terms. That's never good for a fact witness. Fact witness should never be doing those things. And I cringed when I watched it on fast forward, but it was very cringe. Even his demeanor of sort of, I'm up here on the king's pulpit, just lean in and relaxed in. I didn't like any of it.
Remember, he was effectively the replacement for Proctor, so the bar was pretty low already. But yeah, he was bad. He was a horrible witness, and I'm sure the jury is kicking around his testimony right now.
Yeah. Before we let you go, this is a great question, because you were denied because the judge said it's within the ken of the jury to know how the police procedures, that the jury understands what was wrong with the police procedures. And this witness, Colin Sixsitter, does Mr. Easter think Joe Public knows what police procedures and best practices are? And that's why how she denied you. She said, of course they know. So I guess that's the ultimate issue.
You know, I don't have opinions about the judge in this case because I would be improper.
No, not the judge. I'm not even asking about this. Do you think that the normal person knows what you were going to testify about? Is it within their normal ken by just watching this jury? I guess that was the issue.
I'll give you the answer I think Yuri should have given. No, I don't. And not to disparage the public, I think you have some very informed public that have more experience watching crime scene stuff. But your general public, if I were to go ask my mom these things, she'd be like, oh, no, you can't do that. No, mom, you can't do that. And that's not because my mom's not smart. It's just that there's certain nuances to law enforcement techniques that aren't generally known to the public. And I think the things that I think we could all agree that you don't collect blood evidence in a solo cup. I mean, that's common sense. But if it's such common sense, then why did the cops do it? Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then it begs the question is, if common sense is so common, why did the cops commonly screw it up? And so then it just needs to be pointed out from another professional. Another professional needs to come in and explain, no, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that this is not how it's done across the country. And you know, clearly I'm not a spokesman for all of law enforcement across the country. I'm only providing my opinions based on my own personal training and experience. But I can tell you, I can't imagine another law enforcement officer looking at this and objectively and thinking red Solo cups and a grocery bag and a leaf blower was the best practice.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, I don't know, based on what we've seen and heard of you and our chat, I think you would have had a pretty powerful impression on this jury, but unfortunately they did not get that chance. So Michael, thank you so much. Yeah. Hey, I have a lovely car for you. You know, pick one of these car off my lot. Thanks for coming on, man. And yeah. I will reach out again. I guarantee it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mike. Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good one, you guys.
Go vacation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Riding flames, they charge with